Thank you for taking the time for doing this today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
I'm a huge fan of the series since day one. I've been really loving everything they've done. Just so creative and
Yeah, definitely.
clever and funny and fun. And
Yeah,
it's one of those series that you can recommend to so many people.
right?
Just reaches a wide audience.
It really does. It really does. I love it for that as well.
And congratulations on the nomination. That's got to be thrilling.
Thank you. Yeah, it is very, very exciting.
So, what was it that made you want to take part or be part of Only Murders in the Building?
Well, I have to say that my ears definitely perked up when I heard Steve Martin and Martin Short. Those two in particular have just been making me laugh since I was a kid. So I was really thrilled at the opportunity to work with them. And then when I got on the phone with, the very first call I had with the showrunner, producer, and directing producer, and they pitched me the idea of doing a silent episode, I was just completely sold. I knew like I've built a lot of my career on telling stories about, marginalized communities and, working on shows like The L Word or, my own films, which center like Palestinian American, Arab American narratives, and a show like Rami, which is again like the first, Arab American show on television. So it was like really meaningful to me to get to do that kind of work, to tell a story from a point of view that we don't often get to see.
Did they say why they selected you for this episode?
It's a good question. My memory was that John, I feel like maybe it's a better question for them, but I remember them saying that they really loved my work on Rami. And Jamie Babbitt is someone who I've known for like 20 years. She directed the pilot and is the directing producer, or was the directing producer in season 1, and also is, a fellow nominee. So Jamie has been, is familiar with my work. And I think that the showrunner and producer, John Hoffman and Jess Rosenthal, became familiar through the show Rami. That was kind of, I think, their gateway into some of my work. And I think maybe it was just, I had done a lot of capsule episodes on Rami, and I think they really thought those episodes stood out. And that's my remembrance of what they said to me in that first phone call.
And was the chemistry there from day one?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's such a great group of people. Like I said, I've known Jamie for 20 years, and we've kept in touch over time. And John is just like one of the nicest people I've ever met, like truly, truly lovely. And, same with Jess. It was just like from the moment that I was on the phone with them, it was just great, like really good chemistry.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to speak with John earlier this year, and he's just so passionate and excited about the series, but also working with all these great artists, and it just comes through in everything, every word he said about it. It was fantastic.
Yeah. He's really fantastic. He has an amazing vision, and yet he's still very open to ideas, which I appreciate so much, because sometimes you meet showrunners who are just really married to their vision. And then sometimes you work with showrunners who don't quite have a vision, so it's like he has such a kind of confident balance of those two things, of just like having a really distinct vision for the show, but also being really open to ideas. So I really appreciate that about him.
So being such a unique episode, The Boy from 6B, of course, the approach is much different than any in the series, and much different than I've seen just about anything. What was the process in storytelling? How did it differ from a typical episode?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I definitely get involved as early as I can in most things that I direct, especially if I can, like if scripts come to me early, which they did on this, which was great. I can typically give script feedback, like where it's appropriate, like where I feel like I, have strong feelings about something. And I did get the scripts early on for this block and for this episode. And I had kind of an early concern in which I started kind of an early conversation with everyone where, when this idea was first pitched to me, it was pitched as an episode from the point of view of a deaf character. And then when I read the script, I realized it's half of the episode is told from the point of view of a deaf character, and the other half is told from the point of view of hearing characters who are also being silent. And so a lot of my early prep was really around making sure that the scenes with the hearing characters being silent were totally earned and grounded and didn't ever feel gimmicky, because my worry was that they would undermine the story of the deaf character and the point of view of the deaf character. So we had a lot of conversations around that, and I, maybe got more involved than I would in other script, in the script process, simply because of the uniqueness of this situation. I also very early on got in touch with the actor playing Theo, because I wanted to authentically represent the deaf community. And, as someone who also understands what it is to be both underrepresented and, even dangerously misrepresented as an Arab American, a Palestinian American, to be even more specific, I was really sensitive to wanting to involve the community, to just really to do my homework, to do my research, to understand, the ways in which they have been misrepresented and the ways in which they have authentic representation out there. And so, James Caverly, who plays Theo, was amazing, and he really acted as my guide through navigating that research of representation. He steered me to some like a show on the Sundance Channel called This Close, which is created by deaf creators. He steered me to a PBS documentary that was also very, very helpful. And then he, sent me some examples of things that were not good representations, and told me why. So a lot of that was just kind of educating myself and making sure that I, was just had all the information I needed to make the most authentic choices for the episode. I guess the other thing is, because we were telling the story from two very distinct points of view, I wanted to create kind of a visual style for Theo that would really differentiate his point of view visually and obviously sonically. And, I worked with, started working with the editor kind of early on in that episode. I had conversations with the composer very early on. And just the three of us kind of worked together, the composer, editor, and I, to kind of think about what the soundtrack might be like and how they might differ for the two different storylines. And so it was really a much more involved process. And, whereas a director in episodic TV might not, even talk to the composer of their episode, I ended up having a few conversations, and he ended up actually, even having some score ready for my cut, because we wanted to do a really pared down version of the main theme. So it was honestly felt a little bit more like prepping an indie film in some ways, just in that there was a lot more involvement in general across the board.
Yeah, well, you've touched upon about 5 of my questions, so I'm going to do my best to, but I appreciate it.
No, I can
which is
go
good.
into more depth if you.
I love that. I love when an artist knows who is that involved and can break down every crossing of every T, every comma, every aspect of it, because they truly want to tell their story the way they want it told. And that's what I hear. That's what I hear in what you're saying, from the visual approach to working with James to the soundtrack. That's absolutely fantastic. So let me go back and dive into just a little bit of the visual approach, because I did notice the way the camera was used when telling his story, when he was on screen, compared to other moments. This is a very visual episode. So how did you plan that out? Did you have a storyboard for it, or what was the approach when figuring out the kind of the shot list and how it's going to be told? Because you can, a lot of this you can tell without take away the dialogue, and you can still track what's going on.
I'm so happy to hear you say that, and that was really the goal. And interestingly enough, the spark of inspiration came from James Caverly, from Joey himself. In a very early conversation I had with him, he said to me, I know that you're going to be doing, I know that a hearing audience is going to understand the difference in the point of view between, Theo's character and the trio, because you're going to have different, the sound is going to be quite different for the two. He said, but how is a deaf audience going to see the difference between Theo's point of view and the hearing trio's point of view? And it was really a question that kind of struck the heart of like the challenge of the episode, like the visual challenge of like, how do you create a visual language for Theo that's so distinct that you can turn off the sound and know that you're in a different point of view? So I really sat with that question for quite a while, and just knew that that we had to craft something really unique. And I think it really came from wanting to push two things. One is really wanting to push the noir aesthetic even further for Theo, knowing that, okay, this is a show that very much embraces the noir aesthetic and does so really beautifully. So how can we push that further for this particular character? And then also, this is a character who we've not really seen much on the show. And I wanted the audience to really be in his shoes, because he was written as a very complex character in a great way. And there's a world in which you could see him as just a villain, but obviously there's so much more happening. In the timeline in the past, we come to understand what Theo, like really what his pain is, like what he has suffered, what secret he has harbored. And so I wanted to really put the audience in his shoes. So I chose to kind of shoot him very subjectively, whereas our hearing trio is shot, in this kind of objective style, much more objective style. Theo is really subjective, so that whenever we're shooting scenes with him, we are in really long lens point of view shots, so that he can, read people's lips. And one of the other things that I learned from James is like, when you're deaf, some of your other senses are really heightened, and you really visually, you're a much more visual person. You notice things, you see things that your average person might not see. And so we wanted to really allow the audience to feel that and kind of be in his shoes and really see the details that he's seeing and noticing. So that was kind of first off the bat, like one of the things that we decided. And then, in working with the cinematographer, who's also fantastic, Chris Teague, when we then shoot Theo, in order to kind of contrast those long lens points of view, we're kind of shooting wide angle close up so that we feel this closeness to him, this intimacy with him, but also like we feel his distress, because it's, at times so close that it feels a little distorted. So that was kind of like the visual style that we went for. The moment I realized that I wanted to shoot him really subjectively, we sort of translated that into those two aspects, the kind of long lens point of views, and then the wide angle close-ups on Theo.
It shows, and I really want to go back now and watch it again for the third or fourth time.
That's awesome.
To take your words and to watch it from that perspective, as from a director's mindset, I guess.
Yeah, one of the other things that I was actually really excited about that worked. Because sometimes when you're directing, you try different things and you never know if it's going to work or not. But if your instinct tells you to try it, then usually I go with my instinct. But we were shooting the scene where Theo is watching his father and Oliver, Martin Short's character, in like the elevator vestibule, and he's reading their lips and getting all of this information. Then they get in the elevator and they go. And he comes out of the stairwell and he pauses and, he says, he signs, "People in this city talk way too much," or something like that. And
are you reading my notes? I swear, everything.
No way.
You're like two questions before me. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Awesome.
I want to touch upon that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, the thing that I was really excited about was we shot a couple of takes of that, and he signed. And then I was like, I want him to look right into the camera. I kept wanting him to look right at us. And so I gave him the note, and no one else knew. I went directly to him and I said, "Can you look right into camera when you sign this?" And so he did it on a take. He walked out of the stairwell, he looked right into the camera, and he signed. And when I called cut, everybody started laughing, like they loved it. And so I was so excited that that worked, because it's one of those things where early in the episode, he looks right at the audience. And in a way, it's like he's telling you a secret. And it's like immediately you identify with him in that moment. And that was kind of what I was hoping, we could create by having him look right into the camera.
It's crazy. You're giving me the chills, because that's what I got from it. That's what I
Oh, yay. That's awesome.
going back in, I didn't remember that exact moment, but watching it, well, the first time you watch it, you're watching it as a mystery and you're meeting these characters. So you don't take in as much, but when you go back in and get to really break it down, there's so much that to appreciate. And that's one of the things I love is from the get-go, you kind of break away, because when you see characters and, you talked about representation, there's nothing I hate more than false representation. Than, hey, there's a deaf character, they're the deaf character, like put a label on them and say, no, they're a person who happens to be deaf, or they're a person who happens to be from born here, celebrates this, who grew up, whatever it is.
Yeah,
they're a person first, and that's what you did instantly. He's like, it was like fucking New Yorkers talk too much or whatever.
Talk way too much in this fucking city is what he said.
Yeah, that's what it was. And you don't expect that, and it just, like you said, it's kind of like a handshake. Like, hey, like the person you're standing with in line when someone's taking too long to pay, and you have that moment of humanity where you go, oh, and you both roll your eyes at each other. And that's what it was. You're like, he was no longer a deaf character. He was just Theo. And you kind of started the journey off. And I really appreciated how you did that. And just to have it from the get-go was perfect.
Yeah.
And as you're saying about gimmicky, I didn't find it gimmicky at all. I thought so much. I thought when you went into, like, say, the Scrabble match, I was like, okay, this can get, could be a little campy or a little corny, and it wasn't. It was actually sweet. And as we learn, it's the relationship sours a little bit later on. But but when you're watching it, it's this budding relationship you use that moment just so perfectly. It feels like a standalone in a way, yet it completely connects to the rest of the series. I'm sorry, I didn't come here to talk. I came here to listen.
No, but that's great to hear. I'm so grateful that you noticed all these details. That's great.
So what has the response been from the deaf community, as well as other fans of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people have just been really happy. Like, I think the reaction has been like, this is great, that they feel that it's like an authentic representation, that they're so, like, it's so nice to see a character, like a deaf character, in a storyline that's not about him being deaf. I think that is something that, that's definitely something that has been said, that is so refreshing to see, ASL and subtitles, and that even the kind of the visual language of, like, being so clear that, now we're in the deaf character's point of view. I think there's just there was a lot of just appreciation for the episode and the character in general.
And when the sound design, as you mentioned, comes into play as well in the storytelling, how did you settle on it? What did you explore? Like, were there other solutions that you explored before you settled on, what you have now?
Well, I think very early on, we all knew that we wanted Theo's scenes to really be subjective, like, again, like really hearing the world through his point of view. And so my task was really to find out what that sounded like what could Theo's, hearing, what could that sound like? What would we hear that would be an indication of what it might be like to be, Theo? And James pointed me to that PBS documentary that I mentioned earlier. I think it's called Through Deaf Eyes. And in that documentary, there's like a moment where they give you an example, like it's like a 5-second sonic example of what a deaf person might hear. And what it sounded like to me was like, it sounded like a film projector whirring. And I was really excited when I heard it, because I was like, this is it. This is the basis for our Theo soundtrack. So I mean, I listened to it a bunch of times. I recorded it as a voice memo on my phone, and then I literally had everybody listen to it. I sent it to everyone. I sent it to the, composer. I sent it to just the editor, everyone. And I said, this should be kind of this feeling of a machine, like a projector whirring, should be kind of the basis for that soundtrack. And then also, we talked a lot about vibration, and just like a deep, kind of low hum, like machinery vibrating hum. And so there were just like a lot of conversations to begin with, and then just a lot of sound design with my editor in my cut, where it was just like literally creating like layers and layers of sound in order to give you the sense that there was no sound. You know what I mean? It's sort of interesting how you're like creating nine layers of sound in order to kind of give this sense of like silence, but very, very distant rumble. So that was really kind of like what that process was.
Yeah, it works again. I think those. I was wondering, is it something that's based on studies, or if it was just more of a stylistic, trying to get across the feel? But it sounds like a mashup of the two, which is
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because every deaf person's different, and what they might hear, depending on what level of hearing they have or don't have, is different. And you can ask. It was interesting because even in my conversations with Joey, he was like, well, I can't really tell you what, like, I don't have anything to compare it to. So, it was not really possible for him to like really explain what that might sound like, if you know what I mean. So it was sort of like, once I found that clip in the documentary, it was like, that was what I held on to, as like, here's something that is a realistic sound that a deaf person might hear.
all right. I do have to wrap up. I didn't realize how long we were. I don't say it unless I mean it. I really love this series. I too, when I heard Steve Martin and Martin Short, I was like, okay, where do I sign up?
Exactly, right.
And then the podcast vibe, the murder mystery, so many different elements. I'm like, how did this show not exist already? Like this, it's,
right.
It's just a perfect combination. So real quick, I want to ask one shot. There's this, he's looking through the hole in the, is it a painting? It's kind of got a Hitchcock, Psycho vibe to it. Was that intentional to keep him under the shroud of possibly being the villain?
You mean like him looking from behind the wall? Well, that was something that was scripted. So I don't know if, and definitely has that like creepy Norman Bates vibe. And, the funny thing about this episode, it was an interesting balance, right? Because at the same time that you want to understand and have sympathy for this character, you also are meant to believe he could be like the murderer. And so it's interesting because, it's like, he's fair game in a way. Like he still could be like one of the suspects. So like that, in that moment, you are kind of meant to like, okay, there's something much darker happening. It's either him or his father, like the fact that there's even this little peephole from behind the secret room is pretty creepy. Definitely very.
You want to like him, and you set it up early on. His father being kind of abusive, right. And whatever you want to call it, abusive, tough love. I call it abusive, but
abusive. I think it's right.
He is a sympathetic character, but then you're like, wait a second, maybe maybe he's not the best guy. But which is another thing about the series that really works, is it keeping all those question marks hanging all the time. But I will wrap up. I don't want to keep it too long. I just want to ask, what was it like working with the legends, with Steve Martin and Martin Short?
Oh my God, it was such a dream. They are amazing. I mean, they're so lovely and so open. And, you never know what it's going to be like in those situations, because, I've definitely worked with actors who are super experienced and don't really want guidance from a director. But what's really nice is, and those actors generally just have it covered. Like they're very, very meticulous about their character, and they've already thought out every possible direction. So, there's not a lot of people like that out there, but there definitely are some actors like that. So you never know how open people are going to be, or whether they're just going to want to kind of do their own thing. But I found that like Steve Martin and Martin Short were both just so open and willing to try anything, and just amazing and fun, like really fun and funny to be around.
That's awesome. Well, let me close with this. Can you give me 3 words to describe Only Murders in the Building? How about your episode? How about not your episode, but this episode? I know you have 4.
3 words to describe this episode?
Yes.
Oh man, that's hard. 3 words. Do they have to be disparate words, or could it be like a sentence?
It can be a sentence. It can be any way you want to use it.
You know what? The first thing that comes to mind is silence is golden.
I like it. I mean, I love it, actually.
You know what I love? I will say one thing, and the reason that comes to mind is because one of the things that I discovered about this episode after of course making it, and like people watching it, is that it forced people to stop multitasking and actually watch the television.
Yes.
And I love that. I absolutely love that. Like the fact that people had to put down their laundry, stop folding, like the moment, like I can't tell you how many people were like, oh my God, when I realized that there was no dialogue, I actually stopped folding my laundry and watched TV.
So true.
And it's like so great to know that people leaned in to the episode because it was silent. And so, yeah, silence is golden.
Yeah. In a world where we're completely distracted 100% of the time,
exactly,
you were forced to set everything down and say, okay, I'm going to watch, and I'm going
to focus on this one thing and not multitask. And yes, like you said, like do 10 things at once. And we live in such a crazy distracted world. So I was really tickled to know that people had to pay attention and actually focus on the storytelling.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Best of luck at the Emmys.
Thank you so much.
And also good luck. I know you have some big acting roles coming up as well.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing those.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really great to talk to you.
It was great to talk to you as well. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye now.
Thanks, Stephen. Bye.